Welcome back to the mother of all talk shows, everybody. I hope you're all having a great night. I'm Jackson Hinkle. I'll be filling in for the beloved George Galloway. Very tough spot to fill in for, but we've got quite the show ahead of us. We've got Chay Bowes who will be joining us later, as well as the one, the only, Lieutenant Colonel Anthony Aguilar. Lots to discuss as bombs rain down on Saudi Arabia and the Zionist entity, as well as U.S. bases all across the region. It's going to be one big show. You're not going to want to miss it. Stick around. We'll be right back on the mother of all talk shows. Well, everyone knows how the Vietnam War ended. It ended in American defeat, total collapse, crisis, chaos. We know that tens of thousands of U.S. troops were killed in that war, a war that didn't need to happen, a war that millions of Americans were opposed to. And we know that hundreds of thousands, over 300,000 American troops were injured in that conflict. I don't see any reason why we shouldn't have learned from the lessons of the Vietnam War, any war that we've had since in the United States, but apparently we are in the books for a reiteration, probably one that's going to be far worse, of that very war. We know that Donald Trump is open to the idea of sending U.S. troops on the ground in Iran. Every single media outlet in the United States has said as much, as well as Israeli media, probably the people who want U.S. troops on the ground the most. But we got news this week that Donald Trump has decided to send 2,500 U.S. Marines en route to the Middle East. They landed in Singapore yesterday, and now they're making their way to the region. No one knows what they're doing, what the goal is. There's a lot of talk about the possibility of taking Kharg Island, which we'll discuss more in a second. But what we do know is that over 2,500 U.S. Marines are currently en route, and their families are very concerned. Now, I just said we know how the Vietnam War came to an end, but a lot of people don't know how the Vietnam War started. Would you be surprised to find out that the Vietnam War began the same exact way? The United States decided to send a Marine Expeditionary Unit of 3,500 troops to a place called Da Nang in South Vietnam, which went on to become the staging ground for U.S. troops in the south of Vietnam. By the end of the year, after they sent these first Marines to Vietnam, there was a grand total of over 160,000 U.S. troops in Vietnam, many of whom went on to die or to be injured in this war, in this illegal, unjust war. The same exact thing is happening now. It doesn't matter that millions of Americans oppose this war on Iran. It doesn't matter that we know that more Americans will die. It doesn't matter that their families and many of those who are getting sent off to the front line right now are very worried. They don't want to fight in a war for Netanyahu or Israel, and they definitely don't want to participate in more massacres like the Minab elementary school massacre. They are getting sent into what can be only described as a suicide mission. And I pray for all of those troops. I pray for the Iranians. I pray for everyone involved. But make no mistake about it, those U.S. troops who are currently stationed in and around the region and across the world, they do have a choice. They have a legal choice they can make. They can consciously object, or they can decide to participate in this mess. But what we do know is it's not going to end well. We know that the American government doesn't care about the health, well-being, or safety of the troops which are getting sent to the region right now. If they did care about those troops, they wouldn't be sending them on a venture like securing Kharg Island, which is just a few miles off the coast of Iran's mainland. It's an island so small you can walk across it in 45 minutes. And for what? Yeah, Iran does 90% of their oil exports through this island, but we know for a fact that Iran has plenty of other alternatives to ship their oil. They've shipped 10 million barrels of oil since the war began, and they are making record profits in the process. How are they doing that? Well, they have land transfer of oil. They have ship-to-ship transfer at sea. They have plenty of other alternatives. They have been preparing for this eventuality that the U.S. would try to take, or they would bomb Kharg Island for many, many years, decades actually. So what's the purpose of sending 2,500 troops to go and potentially take Kharg Island? I happen to believe that the whole purpose is to get a bunch of U.S. troops unalived in what will undoubtedly be a ridiculous, non-strategic move that will only justify the further deployment of U.S. troops to the region. Call it a false flag, call it a bad strategy, call it Netanyahu's favorite plan. I don't know what you want to call it, but that will undoubtedly be the end result. A bunch of U.S. troops on a tiny island with no cover whatsoever, a government and a military that have not learned the lessons of the Ukraine war. They haven't learned just how deadly amphibious landings are in today's day and age. They haven't learned how deadly FPV drones can be in today's age. And this is going to result in absolute disaster. But again, they don't care. They don't care. If they did care, they'd be following in suit of people like Joe Kent, the director of national counterterrorism, who resigned just yesterday, less than 24 hours ago. Apparently, we're going to be getting a conversation with him and Tucker Carlson tonight. They'll be discussing solutions, a roadmap, American path to getting out of this messy war on Iran, which we all know is not going well. I don't know what solutions could be offered at this late stage. The Iranians certainly are not having any sort of ideas of a ceasefire. In fact, the foreign minister of Iran, Mr. Araghchi, today, he said, ceasefires, temporary ceasefires, these are only for nations that cannot avenge the fallen. What does that tell you? It tells you that no one in Iran, even the reformists, even the people that pursued the Iran deal years ago, are not interested in peace at the moment. They understand that Israel, the United States, and the allies all across the region who claim they're not involved in this conflict, but we know they are intent on total destruction and regime change in Iran. They're looking for their Delcy Rodriguez, but all they're really doing is creating a Kim Jong-un in Tehran. Well, we know for a fact that many in the U.S. White House are not happy with this war. In fact, according to Joe Kent, he said, Iran did not pose an immediate threat. We started the war under pressure from Israel and its lobby. This is a man who lost his wife fighting against ISIS in Syria. This is a man who's deployed all across the world, fought the U.S. regime's wars in the most unthinkable conditions. But even war on Iran is a step too far for him. What does that tell you? We have countless reports from Axios with insider sources today saying that many in the Trump administration feel as though there is no way out. And they're very concerned about that. Frankly, I'm surprised that Tulsi Gabbard, the director of national intelligence, has not followed in suit behind her underling, Joe Kent, and resigned as of yet. Tulsi Gabbard is someone who I used to know. I've spoken to several times. I thought she ran a very impressive campaign for the presidency of the United States years ago. In fact, during that campaign, she published videos talking about how there needs to be no war on Iran. She sold T-shirts on her own website which said no war on Iran. She co-signs the No War on Iran Act in the United States Congress while she was running for president. But now she's doing the regime's bidding. She is choosing to ignore the sane minds in the administration or jumping ship, and she is going along to get along with the regime in this illegal war, which will result undoubtedly in many more of her fellow soldiers dying in a pointless conflict. We'll see what happens with Tulsi Gabbard. We'll see if she decides to wake up, but I'm not holding my breath any way, shape, or form. Well, the question then becomes, what is next for the United States? What is next for Israel? What is next for the Iranians? Well, for the United States, I don't think things are going to get all that much better. Joe Kent's going on Tucker Carlson, exposing just how bad it really is. I think a lot of Americans will have a big wake-up call as to just how much the U.S. government is working in the disservice of our nation, of our economic interests, of the health and well-being of our troops and American citizens all across the world. But it's not just that, of course. We saw today that the United States and Israel did joint attacks on Iran's major gas refineries and facilities in the south of Iran. Now, the Iranians have promised that if their gas facilities are attacked, they know what they're going to do immediately. They are going to launch attacks on all of the oil and gas facilities across the region. In fact, they've actually listed which ones they're going to be hitting. They have no problem listing which facilities they will be hitting because, of course, all the air defenses of these GCC countries are in the gutter, nowhere to be found, just like the Iron Dome. For the American people, they will soon feel the pain of what it means to have these GCC countries' oil and gas assets targeted. You'll see huge increases at the pump. To my friends in the United States, I said, go fill your car one last time while you still can, before only the rich and famous have the ability to fill their cars. Right now, oil prices are through the roof. Gas prices are up 26% since the war began, and it is only going to get worse. But I don't really think Trump cares about whether or not the American people can afford their gas. I don't think he cares about whether Americans are dying in this conflict. And I don't think he really cares even about projecting power at this point, because he can't. They're talking about going and getting Kharg Island. He's begging European nations and China, oddly enough, to come and free the Strait of Hormuz. But there is not a single U.S. aircraft carrier, not a single U.S. carrier strike group within 700 kilometers of the Iranian coast. The USS Gerald R. Ford, they had a major fire. No one really knows why. According to Al-Mayadeen, that fire broke out as a result of mutiny on board the ship, and I'm not surprised. This is the same group of sailors which were shoving their undershirts down into the pipes, into the toilets of the USS Gerald R. Ford before the war began, and as a result of that, they had to take the ship into dock in Greece because the plumbing faced a major issue. Now we're seeing reports that actually there was not just a spontaneous combustion on board the USS Gerald R. Ford. No, what actually happened was the sailors, probably knowingly, probably on purpose, had a little bit of mutiny and decided that they were going to, in fact, allow a fire to break out in the laundry room. Laundry fires are a big problem on military vessels, especially on submarines. Everyone knows this, and they can cause a lot of damage. Apparently, there were 3 U.S. sailors who were injured as a result of this fire. 600 sailors on board that ship had to sleep on the floor because of the aggressive amounts of smoke that were plaguing their cabins. And now the ship is headed over to Greece. The USS Abraham Lincoln, they claim, just decided to leave the territorial waters one day. The Iranians claim, however, that as a result of 3 different attacks on the USS Abraham Lincoln, at least one of which was successful in hitting its target, the USS Abraham Lincoln had to flee over 1,000 kilometers away to avoid being hit, struck, even sunk by the IRGC forces. The U.S. Air Force is no different. We know what's gone on there. All of the main beacons of U.S. military might that they parade around the world are coming to an absolute collapse. And I should also add that that includes not just the U.S. Navy, not just the U.S. Air Force, it also includes the U.S. dollar. We know that the Iranians have a stranglehold on the Strait of Hormuz, but we have seen them allow for certain ships to enter and exit the Strait of Hormuz. We know that a Pakistani ship labeled Karachi was able to leave the Strait of Hormuz because the oil on board the ship was paid for in the petro yuan. In fact, the Iranians have a new idea for the Strait of Hormuz. The Iranians are coming out and announcing that in the future, the Strait of Hormuz situation will not return to its pre-war status. That's a clear indication, as I've ever seen, that the Strait of Hormuz will not be a safe ground for those who uphold the petrodollar and the global reserve currency that is known as the US dollar. We are in a new world, and the Iranians are not afraid to challenge the United States, and it makes a lot of sense. The Iranians, their highest power is the one, the only, Allah, the God above, and that's why the U.S. is attacking all of these religious figures and clerics in Iran. The Iranians understand, though, that the highest power for those in the United States, specifically the highest power for those on Wall Street and in Washington, D.C., is not God, not one God above, but it is the U.S. dollar. That is who they worship. It's what they worship. And by attacking U.S. interests in the region, by attacking the Strait of Hormuz, by attacking all of the oil and gas assets of the GCC countries, they are able to do much more damage to the United States as God than the U.S. can do to any sort of religious authority inside of Iran. We also heard from the Iranian spokesperson of the IRGC today that you attacked our infrastructure and energy in the south, referring to the gas infrastructure. Now your infrastructure, energy, and gas facilities will burn to ashes at the first opportunity. That was a red line for the Iranians, which we're now seeing play out. Today's strikes on the gas facilities in Iran immediately brought the flow of electricity into Iraq to a screeching halt. Iraq immediately lost 3,200 megawatts of energy as a result of the U.S.-Israeli attacks on the gas fields in southern Iran. But make no mistake about it, it's not going to get any easier for those in the Gulf countries because the Iranians have already laid out a series of targets. In the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, there are 2 different refineries and petrochemical complexes which they have announced they will target. In the United Arab Emirates, the Al Hassan gas field will be targeted. And in Qatar, the Ras Laffan refinery, phases 1 and 2, will also be targeted. These will not just be symbolic targets either. The Iranian military spokesperson gave a statement just about an hour ago. He said, you attacked our infrastructure and energy in the south. Your infrastructure, energy, and gas facilities will burn to ashes at the first opportunity. Your era of glory is now over. Withdraw from the region or choose the alternative. And he didn't actually say the alternative. I'm just not going to say what he actually said because I don't want to get Mr. Galloway's YouTube channel in trouble. Very strong words coming from the Iranians, and they are acting upon the threats. As we sit here right now, Saudi Arabia has come under repeated attacks by the Iranians. There are massive explosions going off all across Saudi Arabia, primarily in Riyadh. But it's not just Riyadh. We're also seeing attacks on the United Arab Emirates. We're seeing renewed attacks by Iran and the Lebanese resistance on Israel once more. And Trump can do absolutely nothing about it. There's nothing he can do about it. We'll be talking about that more with our guest tonight because one of our guests is actually an expert on these matters. One of our guests has served in these conflicts, and he understands just how cornered the United States is right now and how far they're willing to go to justify massive troop deployments to the region to try and make this another endless forever war. I don't know about you guys, but I was born in 1999, and I've seen my fair share of conflicts that the U.S. has claimed they would have total victory in. We saw Iraq. Well, Iraq today has a bunch of Iranian militias, and it looks like the U.S. embassy and bases there are on their last legs. They're about to get kicked out. We saw Afghanistan. After 20 years, the U.S. failed to replace the Taliban government with anyone but the Taliban. We saw the attacks on Yemen, which I was present for in Yemen. The U.S. went running away after their fighter jets fell to the bottom of the Red Sea, and somehow or another, the U.S. thought that despite the fact that they couldn't defeat Ansar Allah in Yemen, they should try Iran. It's not going to go any better. It's going to go much worse. It's going to be a lot more hairy, a lot more ugly. And frankly, I'm a little bit scared about how ugly it might get. As the resignation of Joe Kent comes, that could only mean one thing: either a ground invasion, massive endless war, a false flag, or possibly nukes. We'll be discussing all of this more with our guests tonight, Chay Bowes and Lieutenant Colonel Anthony Aguilar. We'll be right back after a brief break. Thank you so much.
I think you don't have to worry about these things with Mamdani, because my overwhelming feeling is that Mamdani is a phony. He has as much intention of doing these things as, you know, I compare him to a figure in British Labour history who became briefly famous in the US when Joe Biden was found to have plagiarized him during a presidential run some decades ago. But that man's name was Neil Kinnock. He used to talk all this flowery, far left guff like Mamdani does, but he had no intention whatsoever of actually doing anything about it, of doing any of it. So there's no chance whatsoever that Mamdani is going to defund the New York Police Department.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Well, thank you everybody for tuning in. I hope you're all having a good night. If you'd like to call into the show, you can do so. If you're in the United States, you can use the number 1-844-944-3344. If you're in the United Kingdom, you can use 08081-965522. And we also have a worldwide number you can use to call in, 0044-203-966-2625. And we do have a poll tonight. Mr. Galloway may not be in studio, but we do have a poll, and it is a good one. It's actually my favorite poll I've ever seen George Galloway and the mother of all talk shows have. Should Tucker Carlson run for president in 2028? I look forward to getting your thoughts on that later. But first, we have a terrific guest joining us, the one, the only Chay Bowes, political analyst and truth teller, and a man who travels all across the world to get that truth firsthand. Chay, welcome to the show. Welcome to the mother of all talk shows. How you doing today? We've got a lot going on. I can't even wrap my head around it, but what do you make of this resignation of Joe Kent, the director of the Center of Counterterrorism in the United States? It seems like this is an indication that we got a really big problem on our hands, maybe something big coming down the line, like a full ground invasion. Otherwise, I don't understand why he would leave.
Yeah, this is big news, Jackson. Thanks for asking me on. Good to see you. Look, nobody can deny that this is a shocking development. You know, Joe Kent was essentially a loyalist, really. You know, if you check his Twitter page, you'll see that his pinned post is him thanking Donald Trump for the opportunity to head up this very important role. And it's very interesting for one reason, I think. We've been told consistently that Iran and the Islamic Republic of Iran is responsible, essentially, as a kingpin for managing and directing global terrorism, okay? Not only in the Middle East, in places like Lebanon, Hezbollah, as you mentioned, a lot of pro-Iranian militias in Iraq who are now striking the American embassies there. We've been told that Iran is at the center. We've been told that Iran wanted to kill Donald Trump as well. We haven't been given any evidence whatsoever for that either. And this is becoming one of the rationales for this war against Iraq. So the fact that this man, Kent, has walked away from this is very telling, because he would have access, of course, and security clearance to a lot of very, very important and very detailed intelligence. And you got to remember, we also, a year ago, were told by Tulsi Gabbard, the intelligence chief, in the Trump administration that Iran wasn't really a threat, that they weren't a threat at all. So given the context of what's happened with this sort of reverse engineering of attempts to justify the conflict in Iran, given the fact that, most Americans aren't behind this war, at all, his resignation seems to me it's a man getting ahead of something. This reality that he knows something that we probably don't know, probably won't know. And, it also is heartening to see a senior American official doing what he sees as the honorable thing. And again, it's not whether you support Iran or you support the Islamic government of Iran or whether you support Joe Kent. It doesn't matter. It's about facts. What is the data? What has actually been presented to the American people to justify them spending their treasure and the blood of their sons and daughters in a war a long, long way away from the United States of America? And in that context, why has this man resigned? What was the reason for it? It's a very, very interesting development, Jackson.
Well, my thoughts on the matter are if they send U.S. troops, even if it's a small portion of troops, it's going to be, very sadly, and God forbid it gets to this point, but it will be a bloodbath, which will only justify a larger deployment. I don't want to see that. I think that a lot of people maybe in Tel Aviv, Jerusalem would like to see that because it will only guarantee that this becomes a long-term conflict rather than one that can be ended with a Truth Social post. But what do you make of this 2,500 plus Marine Expeditionary Unit deployment to the region? What do you think they're being sent for, if not for anything but the headlines to justify a large deployment?
Yeah. Again, there's two ways to look at it. In military sense, now you're an ex-guest, the Lieutenant Colonel will know this much better than me. I have a very modest military background and military education. But there's a phrase, particularly in the American military, better to be looking at it than looking for it. So that you could suggest that that's the case. But it's also a message to the Iranians and to the region that, this is, and remember, the rationale of these troops, what they exist for. These Marines are there to deploy onto beaches. They have the equipment. They're on landing. They have landing ships. This is a big statement, and it's a relatively small military capability. Jackson, Iran is a vast country, huge country. Well over 90 million people living there. It's surrounded by countries that aren't that, as you will know. And testify, aren't that fond, let's say, of the United States of America. It's a geostrategic fortress, essentially. Any remote idea that putting boots on the ground in Iran would be defensible in any sort of military sense is ridiculous. And you have to look back at the catalogue of failures with interventionist wars in the United States. I mean, go back to Vietnam, this incessant mission creep, more and more troops, putting in a proxy in the south, more and more troops, then a covert war in Cambodia. It ended up the same way the Afghan war ended for the United States of America, all after seeing the Soviets intervene in Afghanistan against the Islamic government, supplying the Mujahideen in Afghanistan with the weapons to take down the Russian Air Force, which had a huge impact on the ability of the Soviet army to defeat the Taliban. When the Taliban were fighting the Soviets, they were heroes. When they were fighting U.S. soldiers, they were terrorists. Still, the deployments kept moving into Afghanistan. The surges kept going in. It failed, as you said. The Americans, after 2 decades, billions and billions and billions of dollars in aid. Remember, they left $8 billion plus worth of weapons, which are currently being used to fight Pakistan in border conflicts in Pakistan. They left that equipment behind. So it's a catalogue of disaster. It's a catalogue of really unfortunate, ill thought out intervention. Same in Libya, same in Syria through proxies, and definitely the same in Iraq, which, as you say as well, is now suffering from a very evolved hybrid type of warfare. Tiny drones, which you can see patrolling U.S. diplomatic and military infrastructure at will, hunting for targets. Exceptionally difficult to stop this type of warfare in resistance movements that are embedded in a country that was destabilized by the Iraq War. And yet, here we are tonight talking about the possibility of Marines landing in Iran. Not to suggest for 1 minute that the Iranians aren't capable of, with, you know, a 2,000 kilometer essentially coastline, huge amounts of embedded defensive infrastructure, vast amounts of drones. And we've been told that 90% of their missiles have been destroyed. That's absolutely unverifiable. The Iranians have been waiting for this for a long time. You listen to people like Mamdani and others. The reality is that the Iranians are not the Iraqis. They're not the Syrian militia. They are prepared for a long war. And every day that goes by that Iran can launch a single Garand drone into one of the GCC countries, a single anti-ship missile into the Straits of Hormuz, they're winning. Every day that this conflict goes on, that the Americans can't stop the Iranians doing that, the tables turn regarding the global economy, regarding stability in the region, and the pressure comes on Donald Trump to fix this, to end it. I've people like David Sachs, a man of great respect for, recently, a couple of days back, said, look, it's time to say we've limited the Iranians, we've struck a lot of targets, this operation is over for us, and disengage. But as I've said before, and I'll say it again tonight to you, Jackson, Donald Trump is a man driven by ego, a powerful ego. And he doesn't want to have to sort of wind his neck in on this and say we're done. Remember, he told us before that the Iranian nuclear program was completely vaporized. It was destroyed. Well, why are we bombing Iran again? This is the first question. Second thing is, he's already declared victory, which is a remarkably naive thing to do against a very capable culture, military infrastructure. And thirdly, where, we were told that there was huge uprising on the street of Iran, and there were 30,000 people killed by the regime. None of this verified whatsoever. But of course, now you have a huge rally around the flag effect in Iran itself, when Iranian people are being bombed and killed and shot, much like when the British heavy-handedly executed the leaders of our revolution in 1916. It turned the whole country against the British, even though a lot of Irish people were fighting for the British Army at the time of the First World War. This heavy-handed response of the Americans, bombing civilian infrastructure, killing those children in the school, and then denying it even happened. This has a rally round the flag effect, on top of a very sort of martial culture in Iran, with the Republican Guard, with this sense that this was a war which was almost always coming to us. And of course, it's a war by proxy from Israel, and America is doing the heavy lifting to some extent on Israel's behalf. This is the position of the Iranians. And it's very hard to argue that they're wrong, particularly when people like Benjamin Netanyahu comes out and says, I've been waiting 40 years to get this job done and to get a superpower to come in here and help me do the housekeeping in the region. It's just not going to be that simple. It can't be that simple. And if the Americans are naive enough, and I'm sure there are a lot of intelligent, well-educated officers in the military and senior officers of that who are telling Donald Trump this very same thing. But what I believe the biggest risk is that because he's declared victory, he'll try to reverse engineer that victory by potentially considering putting troops on the ground in Iran, which would, I think, end up in a lot of Americans dying. And again, the questions will be asked, what are these people dying for? What was the threat from Iran? An Iran that a year ago, Tulsi Gabbard told us was not a threat to us whatsoever. Suddenly it's a threat to us. Where's the evidence? Where's the data? And you can publish as many, Windows Movie Maker videos, and you can call it, like some 1980s Chuck Norris movie. You can name these operations whatever you like, epic, massive, mega fury. That's all fine. Team America, it's all fine. Until someone has to stand in front of the committee in Congress and say, why did these boys die? What was it for? Where's the money? And why is Iran stronger probably today politically and militarily in the region? Because we went in there. Because the scale of warfare and the mechanism by which war is done now. And again, I'd be interested for you to ask this question to your next guest. How war is done now is so different than it was in the Gulf operations to liberate Kuwait, as we were told, and then Desert Storm. It's completely different. Main battle tanks are essentially useless now. A $30 drone can destroy a $10 million tank. How are they going to do this? How are they really suggesting that they are going to overturn a government in a country which they are actually creating support for? Not to suggest that there wasn't any support for the country, for the government that is there. Remember, they removed the democratically elected government of Iran in 1953. Mohammad Mossadegh was removed. He was toppled by a CIA MI6 coup because he dared to nationalize the oil. And where do we end up? 2026. They're thinking of invading this country, this geostrategic fortress. It seems to me absolutely ludicrous. And it seems that the messaging and the theater of this thing from Pete Hegseth and others is completely drowning out the more sensible voices, which are saying this can only end one way, particularly if Americans are placed on the ground in this country. It can only end in one way.
Yeah, well, Trump did say yesterday that he doesn't care if this ends up like Vietnam, which had 50,000 plus Americans killed, 300,000 injured. But I mean, as a last point, surely, the U.S. is going to be saved because Zelensky said he's going to come in. He couldn't protect Kiev or anything like that from Russian drones, Russian missiles, but he's going to come into the GCC countries and help protect them, right?
Look, this is just, it's laughable. I mean, if it wasn't so serious, if people weren't being dragged off the streets in Kiev, forced to go and die for this NATO proxy war, the Americans are open about it. I mean, Trump, I think yesterday said, look, they would have lasted a day without us, the Americans. This meme that the Russians said, we're going to go to Kiev in 3 days. No Russian ever said that. That was General Mark Milley who said that in a briefing in the Pentagon. He said, the Russians will take the place in 3 days. Then the Americans acted and started to supply them with some anti-armor and some support. And the Russians withdrew, remember, from outside Kiev. There was no great battle of Kiev. It's like the ghost of Kiev. It's all manufactured. It's all theater. And it's interesting that you mentioned that. Zelensky now is so desperate to maintain relevance. He's sending people from Kiev, which, as you say, the air defenses in Kiev were completely overwhelmed, essentially. It seems to me that the Russians can strike what they want at will, really, now. He's sending people to the Gulf states to defend against drones that have been fired by Iran. And remember, Iran is a country which, second to Russia now since 2022, was the most sanctioned country on earth. And they've developed these incredible weapons, terrifying weapons, weapons that can, deploy submunitions outside of the range of interceptor missiles. We're seeing the best weapons that the West has to offer, being essentially defeated strategically in the air over Tel Aviv right now. This is something that we're not meant to talk about. We're not meant to talk about the fact that this Persian ingenuity that we've seen deployed now is really worrying the West. What is the West going to do? You can't be everywhere. Defend everywhere, defend nowhere, is an old military adage as well. And in the background, you've got the Russians and the Chinese kind of saying, well, hate to say we told you so, and complaints from the American and British media. The Russians are helping the Iranians. The Chinese are helping them. Newsflash, the British and the Europeans and the Americans have funneled, probably $1 trillion in real terms into a, Nazi adoring dictatorship in Kiev to fire missiles at Moscow. And, what are the Russians meant to do? Say, yeah, sure. We're on your team. It just shows the naivety of the lack of insight in the Western sort of perception. And if they're probably listening to their own propaganda about Iran as well. This will be over by Christmas, Jackson.
Chay Bowes, couldn't have said it better myself. Thank you so much for joining us today. Hopefully wise words that are followed by those in the Trump administration, but I doubt it. Thank you so much. Well, we'll be right back with the show. We're going to take a quick break. We're going to come back with some of your calls, and I will see you all in one moment.
There's a legend on the line in Oklahoma. It's May on Trump. Welcome back, May.
Trump is using a magic 8-ball to make his decisions. He apparently has completely lost whatever mind he had to begin with. This is just ridiculous. Does he really think anyone's going to believe that? I'm here to say, and I'm here to join you and everybody else, the emperor has no clothes on. He's as naked as they come. And unfortunately, I'm pretty sure he got naked with some young people. And that is why he so desperately is trying to kill this whole Epstein thing. And he's just making it worse.
I'm wondering when Donald Trump knew that he was implicated in these Epstein files and what it was that he knew. That's the big question, because he wouldn't have been banging the Epstein drum all this time and then suddenly to pull the rug. That tells me that it was a late decision, that someone came late to Trump to say, you know, you really don't want to be doing that.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
We're back on the mother of all talk shows. That was Chay Bowes, always a delight. Later on, we're going to be speaking to Lieutenant Colonel Anthony Aguilar. But first, I want to read off our poll for the night. Then we're going to take some calls. Our poll for the night is, should Tucker Carlson run for president in 2028? Well, 82% of you seem to be strong American patriots. The other 18%, I don't know. We got our YouTube poll. 75% say yes on YouTube. 79% now. No, 21%. I don't know. Maybe there's a case to be made that it shouldn't happen. Maybe some of you are saying, no, Tucker Carlson should not run for president, because then, of course, there's a very strong possibility he may end up, God forbid, like JFK. That's a real fear that a lot of us share for Tucker Carlson, and it's, it goes without saying that the work he does right now is invaluable, and we hope to never lose a voice like his. But I can honestly say from the bottom of my heart that Tucker Carlson running for president, he would win, and that's why so many people are losing their minds about him right now. Even Laura Loomer, or as Mr. Galloway puts it, Larry Loomer, I love that. Larry Loomer recommending him to the CIA to be arrested. It's almost unbelievable, but then again, you have to remember that the U.S. president just said today that he's okay with a Vietnam-type situation in Iran where hypothetically 50,000 U.S. troops would be unalived. Okay, well, I want to go to the line now. Line one, we're going to have the Big Tomato calling in from California. The Big Tomato, how you doing? You're on the line. Thank you so much for calling in.
Thanks, Jackson. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Terrific. Well, thank you for hosting this evening. And I guess before I get to the question, just a brief sort of prologue or preamble your conversation with your prior guest, Chay Bowes, which was really inspiring, incredibly elegant, and, creates a lot of fear for many of us who already have a great deal of trepidation about the conditions. The pitch of the entire conflict is just so eschatological on both sides, understanding what's at stake for these two groups which are in conflict, and as he pointed out, the emboldenment that we're seeing, certainly on the side of Iran, especially after, I guess, the death of their Ayatollah, which, not to add too much levity to it, has so much reminiscence of Obi-Wan Kenobi allowing himself to be struck by Vader standing there in what's reminiscent garb. So anyway, the pitch is just so incredibly shrill, and let's hope for peace. But my question, Jackson, is this. I'm concerned, distressed by what I see as a lot of perhaps animosity to many Jewish people. They're under a great deal, I think, of character scrutiny, even for those who have no alignment whatsoever to the sides of this conflict that many people are opposed to. Speaking only for myself, I have a lifetime of Jewish heroes who bear no resemblance in character or in intellect or in ideology to any of what we're seeing. Acknowledging, however, that what I guess is often cited as a statistic is that 80+% of Israelis, and not every Israeli is Jewish, obviously, and I wouldn't want to make such a nice kind of assertion, but in any case, 80% of members of the population are evidently proponents of what's happening, at least at a high altitude. And maybe more concerning is the statistics that convey, whether they're accurate or not, what seems like a certain callousness to the suffering that is at the very least collateral, if not deliberate. And one likes to always just maintain their faith in humanity. What can we as a global population do to, how can I put this? If 80% of Muslims were supporters of Takfiri, Salafist, radical, ISIS, ISIL, Al-Qaeda, that would be a dreadful day for Islam. Thankfully, I think it is not anything close to the case. Why or how is it that such a large percentage of extremely educated, I think at their heart, decent, humane, civilized people, major contributors to society and so forth, can continue to throw their support? I don't want to believe, as some claim, that this entity is like the ISIS of Judaism. I don't want to believe that, but what does it mean when 80% are in support of something?
I'll say that when you look at, you say that we're looking at a well-educated population. They are educated, but they're educated by a government that embraces this ethno-supremacy, and that's the problem here. A lot of people that I even grew up with. I remember in my high school, you get sent on. You have the opportunity to go to Birthright and visit Israel if you are Jewish, and it's nothing but propaganda on these trips. And these trips are actually very weird. They try to, breed the young women that they send on these trips with IDF soldiers. The whole thing is really weird. But that's what I'm saying. It's that everything is about the propaganda, and a lot of people simply don't even know about the history. They don't know even what's going on amidst these wars. It's why sometimes when people like from the gray zone, Jeremy Lafredo, he went to Israel just after the 12-day war came to a close, and he was reporting on some of the Iranian strikes that took place there. He was arrested, and then when he was speaking to the IDF and the IOF personnel that had arrested him, they had no idea about some of the basic facts of this war, why this war happened, the targets that were hit. At least that's what they claimed in their conversations with Jeremy Lafredo. But, you have to, I think we all have to understand the level of propaganda that is in play right now. This is a government that has tried to propagandize the entire world and has propagandized a whole lot of people about this genocide that's been ongoing, and now this war that could turn into the war that ends all wars against Iran. But I do sympathize with your views, and I thank you for the kind words. I sympathize with your views that, of course, there's a lot of misplaced hatred in the country right now and across the world towards, a Jewish population that does not fully support this war. I mean, I think of people like Max Blumenthal and Katie Halper and Dan Cohen and Rabbi Yisrael David Weiss, who are some of the most outspoken critics of Israeli statehood, the government, what they're doing, and the ongoing genocide and war. And those are all people who I consider friends, who are Jewish brothers and sisters. So I think when people break through that propaganda mold, they can be some of the most powerful voices for a just order that does not, embody an ethno-supremacist state like the state of Israel. So the Big Tomato, thank you so much for calling in. On line 2, we've got Reza, also from California, the Golden State, my home state. Reza, thank you so much for calling in. What's on your mind? Reza, can you hear me? Reza's gone. We'll come back to him in a moment. But, I do want to say that when you look at this broader situation regarding what the previous caller, the Big Tomato, brought up about anti-Semitism, there is not a larger manufacturer of anti-Semitism anywhere in the world than the Netanyahu government. It's my belief, and it's a belief that's shared by many individuals, that if in fact these wars stopped, Israel stopped acting as an apartheid state or was stripped of their ability to act as an apartheid state, and the genocide came to a close, the levels of anti-Semitism that are measured by all of the NGOs in the United States would drastically fall. People are upset, rightfully so, and they don't know where to place their anger. For a moment, I'd like to say a big thank you to our most donors of this week, the top donors of the week on the Mother of All Talk Shows. We're going to get to some more callers in a moment. But I'd like to say a big thank you to our top donors who visited the moats.tv website: Ramadan Yusuf, Greta Pensini, Johnny Wawa, and Carrie Pay, as well as James Glass. Thank you so much for supporting the Mother of All Talk Shows and George Galloway. Please do become a Moats member on the website if you have the opportunity tonight, and give what you can to support the show. There is a new and improved donation feature on the website, so big announcement on moats.tv. That's MOATS.tv. It's swift and easy to use. Click the Donate Now button anywhere on the site and donate whatever you can afford in any currency you like. One-off donations are welcome, or recurring donations if you have the ability. So thank you to all of the Moats donors. I'm saying that as an American who has a lot of love in my heart for the truth tellers in the UK like George Galloway and the Workers' Party. You're all doing incredible work. And again, I'm very honored to be here on the Mother of All Talk Shows today. So we have Reza back on line 2. Reza from California. How you doing? Thank you for calling in to the Mother of All Talk Shows.
Hi, thank you, and I appreciate taking my call. The call dropped. But, I have a couple of things to say. I'm looking at this with a different angle. I believe, from everything that I've seen, is that Trump hates Israel. Let me tell you why. Trump, if you look at his personality, he doesn't like being backstabbed, and he doesn't like being taken advantage of. The fact that all those photos and all those videos or whatever they have from the back files that they took of him and they exposed that, he's not appreciative of that. So I believe that the only way for him to get back at these people is to kill the puppeteer. To kill the puppeteer is you have to go against Israel. To go against Israel, you have to start a war with Israel. To start a war with Israel, you have to attack Iran. I mean, I'm giving you the quick version. I'm just giving you the meat. So now Iran is bombarding Israel like crazy. You kill the puppeteer, you kill the puppets. So then there goes the Epstein file, or then he gets his revenge from the Epstein file, or whatever he's doing on that point. The other thing is he's really trying to disrupt all the oil and gas productions in that area. He doesn't care that all. I mean, he wants to bomb as many places as he can in Iran, and he knows Iran's going to retaliate and bomb all the other assets in the Gulf, causing disruption for the United States, for the United States assets. And the reason he's doing that is because the petrodollar has been affected, and the U.S. economy has been going down, and it has been going down. It continues to go down. So the only way they get their money back is the United States, being the number one oil producer now, having so much oil, they can become one of the top oil distributors of the world, and therefore they can take over what the West Asia is doing, because now all those places are being bombed. How are they going to export all that oil if all those facilities are gone? The only people that could take over is United States, Venezuela, Russia, and other places. So the only way to keep the petrodollar up is by having as much oil as you can. And that's exactly what they're doing.
Well, Reza, you know, I will say this, you know, it goes without saying that in the early days prior to this war beginning, the Saudis were very opposed to the idea of a war in Iran taking place. And then magically in the final days leading up to the war, it was reported by Axios that the Saudi Minister of Defense traveled to D.C. to give a message to Trump that he actually supported the war and that the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia supported the war. Now, there was no official statements from the Saudi government to that effect, but of course we know that their country is being used as a staging ground for attacks on Iran. So, while some might hear what you have to say and think, well, that's so crazy, we also need to understand that actually, no, I mean, there are hidden upsides that people may be taking into account with this conflict. And for the Saudis, well, they may not love Iran, but there was a peace effectively brokered between them and the Iranians by the Chinese several years ago. And it wouldn't necessarily make a whole lot of sense why they would support that peace being squashed. Why would they support their own oil facilities and petrochemical facilities being targeted? The only upside for the Saudis is that they knew that Israel would be targeted and very hard by the Iranians if this war were to break out. So I'm not going to sit here and act like I know the exact reason and the thinking and the logic behind this war, because frankly I think that there is not much logic involved. I think it's a lot of low IQ people sitting around who got themselves trapped in a corner and now are beginning to understand that they seriously miscalculated. And that especially goes for those in the Gulf states. We've got one more caller on the line here right now. I think we can fit one more in. Eve from Florida is calling in. Eve, thank you so much for calling into the show. How are you doing tonight?
I'm doing well. Thank you. I wanted to make the point that oil for America is very different than oil for other countries. America is neutral for oil. That means they have enough for themselves. But it is the collateral of their currency. That means that the more expensive oil is, the better it is for the US dollar as long as oil is exchanged in US dollar. And what you can, if you see this war under this optic, there are many optics to see this war, but if you see this war under this optic, you see that everything is against the people who are exchanging oil in another currency than US dollar. For instance, you have Venezuela. Now they cannot export oil to China. You have Iran, which is a target. You have Russia, which is a target through the Ukraine war. And you have China, which is the ultimate target, because China, in fact, they use 20% of Russian oil, but the rest come from the Middle East. So the story, if you look at things like that, you see that America is destroying everything which can sell oil and hydrocarbon in another currency than the US dollar. And that was the point.
I fully agree with you. It definitely, in large part, at least for the Iranians, they understand that the biggest pressure point that they can have on the Zionists in the United States is, of course, to target the petrodollar, and they have done that quite well. And that's why I was very impressed by the words of the former Speaker of the Iranian Parliament, Mr. Ghalibaf, I believe is his name. He said that the situation in the Strait of Hormuz will never return to the pre-war status. I think that's maybe a bit of an indication that those who seek to bring oil through the Strait of Hormuz, which will be sold in the petrodollar even after the war, might have some heightened costs, may pay some extra fees, or who knows, may not be able to travel at all. We'll have to wait and see. I want to go back to the poll before we take another break and bring on our next guest. You know him, you love him, Lieutenant Colonel Anthony Aguilar. Let's take a look at the poll, though, first. Should Tucker Carlson run for president in 2028? Every time I see that poll, I just get a big smile on my face. I don't know what to say. Well, 75% of you say yes, roughly 75, 79%. Telegram, 82% say yes. Telegram, very base community there. X, 82% say yes as well. I think that this is just, I think maybe the 25% or 20% roughly that say no. I think it's like Larry Loomer making a bunch of bot accounts or something and spamming the no vote over and over again. Maybe Mark Levin, Larry Loomer, Ben Shapiro, they've all got their bot networks active. I don't know. There is, of course, the case to be made that we should ensure the safety and well-being of Tucker Carlson, and him running for president would jeopardize that. But I wholeheartedly believe that Tucker Carlson can be kept safe, and he would make it into the White House if he ran. And I think that there is no better time than right now for him to declare his candidacy, as those in the CIA, John Ratcliffe and Larry Loomer, as they tried to pin bogus, phony charges on him, as they are acting as agents of a foreign government themselves, the government of Israel. They're trying to say that Tucker Carlson is an agent of Iran, Qatar. I don't know. We'll have to wait and see. But let's take a quick break, and then we'll be back with Lieutenant Colonel Anthony Aguilar.
It was set up in 1949. People, an amazing number of people imagine that it was set up in opposition to the former Warsaw Pact formed by the Soviet Union and the socialist countries. But in fact, NATO predated by some years the creation of the Warsaw Pact, which was in fact an answer to the West creating NATO. Now, I've spent, well, literally my whole life, since I was 13 years old, I've been demanding Britain out of NATO, and now NATO is disintegrating in front of our eyes. I don't know when they agreed the permanent membership and the veto system, but the UN is clearly now unfit for purpose. And I have long believed and proselytized for the BRICS and the SCO and the New World Order to establish their own United Nations, because it seems to me that the current UN in New York is, well, completely useless, has hegemony over it, can even decide which member states are to be allowed a visa to come and speak at the United Nations. It's preposterous. I remember I was with Chavez in New York when the US refused to give visas to his bodyguards. But such was Chavez's charisma that he took to the streets of New York without any bodyguards and was hailed everywhere he turned. Such was the magnificence of Hugo Chavez. He walked around the streets of New York to a hero's welcome without bodyguards because the US refused to allow his bodyguards a visa.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Welcome back to the mother of all talk shows, everybody. I'm Jackson Hinkle, filling in for the one, the only George Galloway. We are joined by, I think, one of the brightest, most incredible voices that we came to all publicly know and love over the past year. That is Lieutenant Colonel Anthony Aguilar. He's a retired U.S. soldier, former worker at the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. He saw the crimes of the Israelis and the United States firsthand in Gaza. And, well, he's joining us right now to talk about this madness ensuing in Iran and around Iran, I guess, as we now send a Marine Expeditionary Unit en route. But first, Lieutenant Colonel Anthony Aguilar, thank you so much for joining us. I want to get your thoughts on the resignation of Joe Kent. How big of a deal is this, and do you think that there will be more resignations that come?
Well, Jackson, it's great to see you. And I want to start by saying, Jackson Hinkle co-hosting the mother of all talk shows is like watching Game 7 of the World Series during the halftime of the Super Bowl. It doesn't get any better than that. So great. I'm so happy to be here today and on this occasion. And I also took your survey. I vote yes for Tucker Carlson for president. I think he would do an amazing job. And if he were, I'd be the first in line to raise my right hand to serve in his cabinet and serve our country alongside him. But so back to the question with Mr. Joe Kent. So I had the opportunity and foreknowledge of serving with Joe Kent in the Army as a Green Beret. He was a Green Beret. I was a Green Beret. We both served in the Special Forces Regiment. He was a warrant officer, more of a technician focused. I was a commissioned officer, some more planning and operations, but we served together. I was also the deputy director of operations in Syria when his wonderful, intelligent, and capable wife was killed in action in Syria, and that touched all of us. So I've known Joe for quite a while, and him coming forward at now, and also not just resigning quietly, but resigning from a political sense in a very loud way. He was a Trump nominee, politically appointed, and he resigned in protest in a written letter. And prior to him resigning the day before, he and Tulsi Gabbard, who I also know from my time in serving together in the military, they went to J.D. Vance prior to that to let the vice president know that he was going to resign and why. And the vice president asked him to please tone down the criticism of the president. So in his letter, he did, but I know that Joe is very critical of the president and the war that this president has started. I do think that there will be more within not only the intelligence community, but within the military that come forward in protest, either through resignation or speaking out against what's happening, why it's happening, and the truth. I think that we can all agree that the administration and the cabal of Western media have largely kept the truth out of the media in terms of the number of casualties, the damage, and the impacts taken to U.S. forces in the region. I think the casualty rate, I think the impact and the damage to U.S. assets such as aircraft carriers, theater defense capabilities is much worse than what this administration is telling the American people. So I think that what we're going to see in the coming weeks, days and weeks, is more of that truth coming out because of the courage demonstrated by people within the administration like Mr. Kent.
Well, I want to ask you one more question about that resignation before we talk about the plans for the war. And, I was very surprised to see that Tulsi did not join in a coordinated resignation with Joe Kent, considering, of course, that Tulsi, as the director of national intelligence, is his direct superior. One might look at the resignation of Joe Kent and say he felt as though that there was nothing he could do to stop this. A resignation, and a powerful one at that, would be the most impactful thing he could do to try to bring this to an end. And that maybe he understands that something big is coming, whether it's a ground invasion or whether it's major new attacks in a way that we can't even imagine. What do you make of Tulsi Gabbard not deciding to join in the resignations? And do you think that we are going to see something? Is this resignation the precipice of something bigger that we'll see from the Pentagon and the Trump White House?
So I believe that Joe's resignation was twofold. One, the understanding of being on the wrong side of history, that this war and it's unjustified, and how it will be judged in history, and those that are in this administration. You know, I posted something a couple days ago reminding everyone that, you know, those that sat in the Nuremberg trial all said that they were just following orders, and that is not a defense. And anybody in this administration that is going along with this war and what we already know that has happened, such as the Tomahawk strike on the school in Minab, or the unjustification of this war in the first place, that there will be accountability. And I think that people are going to begin distancing themselves. But I also believe, because I also believe it and understand it to be, of what worse is coming. So before I get to the Tulsi Gabbard question, which I also have thoughts on, because I do know her, I'll also talk about the deployment of the 31st Marine Expeditionary Unit. So last week it was announced that the 31st Marine Expeditionary Unit, known as the MEU, will be deployed from Japan. It takes time for that unit to get into theater. So when we saw earlier before this war began, when there was still the saber rattling and the rhetoric, that Marine forces from the Marine Expeditionary Force, SP MAGTF, were deployed to the region. Many of those Marines were sent to other locations in the region, not necessarily focused in mass for some type of ground assault or ground operation. And this is what I think is going to happen, because again, it takes time for these Marines to get into the theater, 7 to 10 days if they're really steaming ahead out on the ocean. So right now what we're seeing is U.S. Central Command has begun an active and deliberate campaign of targeting facilities and assets specifically in or near the Strait of Hormuz. We just saw the striking of the oil fields in the northern portion of Qatar, but also yesterday strikes along the Iranian coast on the eastern side of the strait and on the western side of the strait in that tiny little piece of the Strait of Hormuz where the UAE and Oman kind of share that border on that region. Both sides, if you've ever been there, this is not like a beautiful beachfront. It's sheer cliff face. So we're seeing CENTCOM striking both sides of that, which tells me that the United States is conducting preparatory strikes to some way create a passage or create a way to bring in the 31st Marine Expeditionary Unit to take the island of Korog. The island of Korog is an objective that this administration wants to take out of hubris, out of arrogance, out of ego, and quite frankly, military stupidity. Because though you might be able to get in there and put Marines on the island, you're not going to get them off. You're not going to get them out. They will all die. They will all die or they will be captured, and the administration knows that. The administration has now set the conditions for escalation, knowing that it's no longer Trump's decision to back out. As the previous guest was discussing, I think that the time for Donald Trump to say, hey, we met our objectives, victory, that time has passed. It's no longer up to him. Once you stir the hornet's nest, it's up to the hornets when it stops, not the aggressor. So it's not up to us anymore. It's up to Iran. And the more we escalate, the more costly it will be. So in the coming weeks, I see an amphibious assault onto the island of Korog or in the vicinity of the islands within the Persian Gulf that surround along the border or the coastline of Iran. I see tremendous losses, both in resources, personnel, either killed, captured, or wounded. And then I see that as a pretense, much like we saw the pretense under the Truman administration in World War II, to then utilize to surround mainland Japan and then use a nuclear weapon. I do think that this administration has the nuclear option on its list of courses of action on the president's desk to use some type of what they would call a tactical nuke against Iran. I think that that's an option on the table, and I think that the pretense to that is a ground assault in a limited fashion using the Marines, which then escalates into a full ground assault all of the assets to support a full ground invasion are in Iraq. A-10 Warthogs, those support ground assault. The tanks, the ground vehicles, the ground forces are already on alert back here in the United States, such as the 82nd Airborne Division, the 75th Ranger Regiment. Those are ground units. So all of the conditions are set for that. So I do see it escalating to that in the coming days and weeks. Again, it's going to take time because the Marine Expeditionary Unit has to actually get there. So in that time, I see a continuation of what I would call strategic preparatory fires along the Persian Gulf and areas to try to capitulate the Iranian regime, or the Iranian government or Iran, which will not happen. They will not, nor should they. So back to the Tulsi Gabbard question. I'm actually quite surprised that in Joe Kent's resignation, that Tulsi Gabbard not only didn't support that resignation, at least passively, but in her hearing that just happened, she doubled down on supporting the president's claims of this war. And she doubled down on these absolute ridiculously false claims that Iran has been responsible for these attacks against U.S. forces over the last 2 decades. And the truth is, the United States, because of our failed foreign policy and because of our failure to see the strategic future, the United States created Al-Qaeda. The United States created ISIS. The United States forced Iranian proxies in Iraq to attack U.S. forces because we were there. Iran wasn't attacking us on the streets of Miami or at home in our country or in places where we had strategic interests. They were Iranian proxies fighting us in Iraq because we were there under the pretenses of colonialism. We weren't there for weapons of mass destruction. So all of these lies that Iran is the big bad wolf of the region, that's a lie. And now Tulsi Gabbard doubling down on that.
She knows everything.
She knows it. She knows it. But not only does she know it, in her previous position when she was in Congress for representing the state of Hawaii, she was very outspoken against a war in Iran. She was very outspoken against these delusions that Iran was responsible for all of these attacks against U.S. forces in the region over the last 20 years of war. She was very outspoken against it, and now she's not. And what that shows me is that she's politically motivated, and even as such, for those out there in this administration that are politically motivated in thinking that they're going to toe the party line because it's going to ensure their political future, either in the Republican Party or in whatever endeavors they have, they are on a sinking ship. Joe Kent, I believe, in good nature, stood up for what was right, but I also believe that Joe has political aspirations. Tulsi Gabbard, I believe, has political aspirations. And what's really concerning to me is that knowing Tulsi Gabbard as a military officer is that she is doing this out of political aspiration, not because of what she actually believes or thinks. You and I both know she knows the truth.
Well, I think that despite the heroism of Joe Kent, I found it a little bit weird last night. I will say this, and I'd like to get your thoughts on whether or not you have a message to the U.S. military personnel right now who may or may not find themselves in a very difficult position over the next few weeks, because I immediately saw Joe Kent tweet out his letter, and I responded to it, and I said, this is the only patriotic decision you could have made. I hope that U.S. soldiers are smart enough to follow in suit. Obviously, there's legal ways for U.S. soldiers to consciously object. There's illegal ways for them to avoid a conflict, and there's legal ways. But that comment I made was the most liked comment on his entire post. And then magically it disappeared after about 10 hours. He hid the comment. And maybe it's just because I'm a controversial guy. He doesn't want that to be the top comment. Very well could be. But I was kind of thinking to myself, I'm like, well, obviously, Joe Kent, as patriotic as it is, I'm sure he does have political aspirations. And maybe saying that U.S. soldiers should consciously object is a step too far for even someone like him. I know there's a bunch of people who are saying that. Mike Prisner, for example, has been saying that, and he's been volunteering with an organization that's been around for 85 years that helps soldiers find legal pathways out of these sorts of situations. But what is your message to the U.S. soldiers right now? Do you think that now is a good time for those who may be put in the line of fire, maybe sacrifice even, if they're not already being shipped en route, to take a look at their options?
My message to every member of the United States military, regardless of service or branch, from admirals and generals down to privates first class, is you should stand against this and conscientiously object and approach every avenue legally that you can to not deploy and fight in this war and to get out of the United States military. And to everyone that might be thinking about joining the United States military, again, regardless of branch, should not join. And it has to start with the top. I'm calling on Admiral Brad Cooper, the commander of U.S. Central Command. I'm calling on Air Force General Dan Kane, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs. I'm calling on the service chiefs of the services, the Chief of Staff of the Army, the Chief of Naval Operations of the Navy, these service chiefs to stand firm on their oath to the Constitution and to the moral legal obligation that all service members have in not fighting wars that are immoral, unethical, and illegal. And the evidence is clear. The Secretary of Defense of the United States stated in front of the entire country and the world, declaring no quarter. That verbatim to declare no quarter is a war crime. Not only a war crime in international law, but a violation of U.S. law, Code 18, and the United States Code of Military Justice. The President of the United States, not once but twice, has now said that bombing locations in Iran is, quote unquote, just for fun. The Iranian warship returning from India on that joint exercise, the military options were, well, we can seize it, but then, of course, the other option is we can torpedo it. And Trump said that he went with the option to torpedo it because military commanders said that it was more fun to do it that way. These are the words of the President of the United States, the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces. So considering the fact that we now have the Secretary of Defense giving illegal orders of no quarter, we have a war that is being fought under no legal justification. I would remind every service member, especially those in higher ranks, that there will be accountability. The United States will take a tremendous loss in this conflict and will no longer be the nation that sets the rules or gets to ignore the rules or determine what rules gets to be followed. There will be accountability. And those in this military at the highest ranks that stood by this and allowed this to happen, I was just following orders, will not save you from the trial. It will not save you from the death penalty.
Lieutenant Colonel Anthony Aguilar, I couldn't have said any of that better myself, and powerful words coming from someone like you who knows conflict, who's seen conflict, who has participated at the highest levels, and is now fighting at the highest levels against it. And I'll just add that even if these soldiers, even if these commanders, these generals, even if they don't meet a military court one day, they will have to meet their maker. And I don't think that the gates of heaven will be open to those that ordered the massacre of 170 schoolgirls at Minab Elementary or any of the other terrorist crimes that they've committed in this war or other conflicts as of late, and unless, of course, they admit their sins and ultimately find a way to be put in a position to be forgiven. God willing, more people wake up. God willing, we don't have any more U.S. troops dying, but I think that this is exactly where it's going to be headed. So, Lieutenant Colonel, thank you so much, and it's always a pleasure speaking with you, and I look forward to speaking with you again on my soon, very soon. So we are going to be right back, everybody. We're going to take a quick break. Always an honor to speak to the Lieutenant Colonel, and I'll see you all back here. We're going to come back to a few callers in just a moment.
Beautiful call, as always, robust. Terrific characterization of little Macron and the imposter Shah of Los Angeles. He is, of course, an imposter in two ways. He's an imposter in pretending that he has any support from the great mass of the 90 million Iranians who've not seen him since he was 4 years old, when he fled with their riches in the saddlebags, and the father and mother, emperor, empress, Shah, roamed around the world from Monaco to God knows where, spending the millions that they had stolen from the people of Iran. But he's a pretender, an imposter for a second reason. The Pahlavis are not even the royal family of Iran. The royal family of Iran is ancient, millennia, and the rightful emperor or Shah, if there is such a thing as a rightful emperor, rightful Shah, was overthrown by a corporal in the Iranian army, the grandfather of this joker Reza. His grandfather was a corporal, a private soldier in the Iranian army, was raised to the rank of corporal, and then, with British backing, overthrew the actual monarch. And he had a son who was the infamous Shah of Shahs, the father of Reza. So he's a double imposter.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Iranian missiles are raining down all across the region right now. The U.S. doesn't know what to do. Their air defenses are significantly depleted, as are Israel's, of course. But what is about to be depleted, which is going to cause a really big problem for a lot of people, are the oil and gas depots, tankers, facilities, petrochemical facilities, all across the GCC states. That is, in all likelihood, going to be the next big target for the Iranians after today the U.S. decided to bomb the gas facilities in the south of Iran. Well, I'm sure we're going to be discussing this with some of our callers. First on the line, we've got Mustafa from Nigeria calling in. Mustafa, thanks for calling into the mother of all talk shows. How you doing tonight?
I'm doing great, Jackson. Thank you for having me.
Very good.
Yeah. So basically, I have about a couple of points that I would like to put forward. First of all, it's about this horrendous murder of over 170 elementary school girls in Minab. So, of course, the world over the last couple of years has been seeing a lot of conflicts happening. And then those conflicts are not without war crimes. And I believe that this particular killing of these elementary school girls will also be considered as a war crime, most likely. And, of course, the United States tried to deny it by saying that it's not a Tomahawk U.S. missile that hit that school. And obviously, this school wouldn't have been hit by Iran, whom fingers are being pointed at. But it's really not possible. So my question here, what are we likely to see happening in the days to come in terms of accountability for that very crime? Would we see something like, let's say, an ICC arrest warrant like that issued to Putin because of the war in Ukraine? this time around being issued to, of course, the President of the United States. Definitely, that's a very big crime. I can tell.
Well, if we lived in a just world where international law was upheld fairly and firmly, I guess that would be what would happen. But we don't live in a world like that. And you know who decided? We all know who decided that we aren't going to live in a world of, laws and norms and things like this. It was the United States. It was Trump. It was all these people. It was Pete Hegseth when he said no quarter, no mercy. That means if an Iranian soldier were to surrender, they would not be given any opportunities to stay alive. They'd be killed on the spot. So it was the United States who argued this. It was the United States who, since Trump got into office, and before him, of course, going back decades, but especially with the onset of the genocide in Gaza, they told us, I don't know how many times, that might makes right. Might makes right. Well, might makes right is all well and good for the United States when they're in a war against, innocent women, innocent men, children, grandmothers, grandpas, disabled people in Gaza. Might makes right makes a lot of sense for them then. Might makes right makes a lot of sense for them when they can send the U.S. fighter jets that we've given to Israel into Lebanon, and the Lebanese military can't do a thing about it. The Lebanese resistance can, of course, try their best, but they will bomb all the suburban areas of Lebanon with wanton disregard for civilian life. Might makes right then. But might makes right begins to be a problem when they go into Yemen. Fighter jets start falling off of the U.S. aircraft carriers. Their fighter jets are almost getting shot out of the sky by Yemeni air defenses. And boy, oh boy, might makes right becomes a very big problem when they decided to launch a war on Iran. Because the Iranians understand that if they'll play by might makes right, the U.S. is going to have a very big problem. The petrodollar is going to have a problem. The U.S. military, U.S. Air Force, U.S. Navy, they're all going to have a very big problem. So I think that's what's going to be the law of the land for this war. Might makes right, and it's going to bite the U.S. in the butt. Before we get to our next caller, I want to say thank you to our big donors of the night. So let's bring them up on the screen. We're going to recognize Judith Riley. We've got Judith, thank you so much. Amira Katiria, thank you. Dennis Freeman, Ahmed Khalaf, and David Peter Ruppel. Thank you so much for supporting the mother of all talk shows. You can go to www.moats.tv or scan the QR code on the bottom right of your screen to donate now. We have a new program on the website that is ongoing, and it makes the donation process seamless, quick, and you can do it in any currency even, and it's available now on the website. So go check that out. Support the show. You can support the show with a one-time donation or a recurring donation. And as a big fan of the mother of all talk shows, not just the interim guest filling in for Mr. Galloway, I encourage you all to do that because I know how much you all love the mother of all talk show because I love it that much as well. Well, let's go to line 2. We got another caller on board. We've got RB from Canada calling in. RB, thank you so much for calling into the mother of all talk shows. What's your thoughts on everything that's going on now?
Hello, Jackson the Hair Hinkle. How you doing, buddy? It's RB Ham here from Canada, host of the podcast, the Rebel exclusive podcast, Beyond the Pale. And I've been a guest on Jimmy George shows, so nice to see you shooting up in the world and hosting for the great George Galloway. You must feel thrilled about it.
Oh yeah, of course. Nice to have you.
I mean, yes, thank you. So here in Canada, we're going through a little situation. You were mentioning false flags before, but of course they've already started in miniature form in some places. Of course, there's been major false flags before that Israel has pulled off. But their Zionist little organizations, the Friends here in Canada, have decided in the middle of the night they've been shooting at synagogues, and there was a case that the American consulate was shot at too in Ottawa. And of course, nobody gets hurt. It's done in the middle of the night. There's no arrest. Of course, they immediately blame anti-Semitism. And there's a full court press now here in Canada in Parliament on Bill C9 and Bill C22 to limit our free speech rights and bring in hate speech laws. And of course, these Zionist organizations are top and center, trying to conflate any criticism of Israel, its genocide, its ethnic cleansing, its ongoing war with on 7 fronts within, in the Middle East, and trying to say that any criticism of Israel is anti-Semitism. And it's reached a crescendo level. The more crimes that Israel commits, the more times these events happen that are blamed. They're blamed on anti-Semitism, but over and over again in the past they've been caught doing this. There was a Jewish rabbi who was convicted just a couple of years ago of setting a fire in his own synagogue. We've had many instances of people committing so-called hate crimes. Then it turns out that it was done by Zionists inflicting this upon themselves. And of course, it gets a one-day mention in the newspaper, and then it gets washed out of existence. But it happens over and over again. And my question to you, Jackson, is when are the people going to wake up and start realizing that when the boy who cries wolf does it the 44th time, are you still going to fall for it?
Well, RB, what I got to say is that I do think it is very possible that there will be a large-scale, God forbid, large-scale false flag attack, something that will justify sending massive amounts of troops to Iran. They have this plan right now to send the 2,500 or so Marines on this expeditionary unit to Karg Island, but they're going to have to get through the Strait of Hormuz to get there. Okay, if they get the troops there, the Marines there, we all know how that's going to end. It's going to end with a lot of, very, very unfortunately, it's going to end with a lot of body bags coming back to the United States. And that will then serve as the justifications to do a massive ground operation, massive deployment. This is exactly how Vietnam started. Vietnam, we saw a Marine Expeditionary Unit of 3,500 troops sent to Da Nang in the south of Vietnam. And by the end of the year, that was March 8th of 63. By the end of the year, we had over 180,000 troops in Vietnam. But my question is, what if they can't even get the Marines to Karg Island? What if they can't get them through the Strait of Hormuz? It's very possible they don't make it through. So then what? Well, then I think there's going to have to be a plan B, and a plan B might be something far more sinister, maybe a false flag, a real false flag that might not be in the Middle East. It might be a little bit closer to home that would take place. And frankly, I think that's part of the reason why we saw the resignation of the Director of National Counterterrorism yesterday from Joe Kent, because I think he understands, he sees the intelligence, he has the highest security clearance that you can have in the United States, and I think he understands what's about to happen. I think he understands it's about to be something really bad. So, RB, thank you so much for calling in, and I fully agree with you. I hope that, what is it now? It's about almost 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, almost 5 p.m. in New York. In about an hour, we're going to have a conversation between Joe Kent and Tucker Carlson on the Tucker Carlson Network. And while I would be surprised if anything too damning is leaked about what's going on, I think we're going to get a general vibe of what he believes is coming and why he made this critical move to resign in protest with a damning letter. Okay, so thank you for calling in. I want to mention a promotional item, very big item that everyone should listen to right now. In fact, if you are interested in stopping these wars, we've got something that you can't do without. We've got a Workers' Party event at 9 p.m. tomorrow. You can tune into Campaign Talk. Mark Belshaw is joined by Sean Galloway for a discussion on the political issues driving the present debate, streaming live on YouTube and Rumble. That's Campaign Talk at 9 p.m. tomorrow. You're not going to want to miss that. I've got so much love for the Workers' Party. What you all doing with the Workers' Party is absolutely incredible. And I hope from the bottom of my heart that we can, I know we will, be getting members of parliament back in power to be able to speak truth to these people about ending these conflicts. Because we all know that the United Kingdom is participating. They claim they don't want to send their boys to go die. They don't want to send boys in the Strait of Hormuz. But what is the United Kingdom doing with thousands of troops in Cyprus? Can Keir Starmer answer that question? I know he doesn't want to address it. He doesn't want to address the missiles and drones that have been fired upon their bases in Cyprus, but we know that under a Workers' Party, that would not be happening. There would be peace with Iran, and there would not be the need to even consider something like this. All right, let's get back to another caller, shall we? We got Shahram on line 3 calling in. So, Shahram, thank you so much for joining us on the Mother of All Talk Shows. How you doing?
I'm doing well, thank you. And Hinkle, I'd like to thank you for, I watch your programs all the time, and I've been following this war partly through your YouTube videos, so thank you very much. There are a few points that I would like to make. I think there are a few misconceptions that people have. First and foremost is about the alliance of GCC countries with the US. I can tell you from personal experience, because I've grown up in the Middle East. Now I live in the UK, but I grew up in the Middle East. Most people in the Middle East, or so GCC countries, without exception, people who've read their holy book, the Quran, know that US was never going to protect them. Very simply, they knew they weren't going to protect them, and I'll tell you why. 1400 years ago, in the 5th chapter of the Quran, verse number 51, it says explicitly, so this is 1450 years ago, in the Quran, it says, quote, "O you who believe, do not take Jews and Christians as your protectors / allies, because they are protectors of one another. If you take them as your allies, you would be like them. And God does not guide those that are misguided." End quote. So this is an exact verse. People can go look it up. It's chapter 5, verse 51, available on the internet. So that's one point. The second point I'd like to make is that there's a lot of talk on the internet around the Shia-Sunni split. Mostly people who don't understand the Shia-Sunni split are making more of it than it actually is. And I can explain in detail, but I don't think that you've got the time for me to do that right now. But me as a Sunni Muslim, I'll tell you, even in the Middle East, the Sunni Muslims are right behind the Iranians. If you look, they hear the Arabic being spoken by people who are making videos in Saudi Arabia, in UAE, in Qatar, and in especially in Bahrain, they're actually cheering. They're cheering. So if it was Shia, they would say something different, and Sunni, they would say something different, but they're all cheering. Okay, I've recently come back from the Middle East, very recently, and they're all cheering because they're all against their own ruling elite. They're all against their own ruling elite. So that's one misconception I wanted to clear. The third misconception I wanted to clear, and which is quite important, you stated that earlier, was that these GCC countries were against the attack on Iran. That's not true. They were with Israel and the US from day one. Okay? That's a fact. Now they're stuck. Okay, that's the problem. Now they're stuck because Iran is now going to control the Strait of Hormuz. Even if this war ends today, the world is not going to go back to how it was 19 days ago. It's going to be very different. Iran is now in charge of the Middle East. They're the big dog, essentially. Not Israel, not the US. US will have to leave. No matter what happens in this war, the US will have to leave the Middle East. End of. And the other important point to remember is that people seem to think that the US military was misled into this war. They had no calculation. They didn't work out what was going to happen to Strait of Hormuz and the attacks on US bases. Israel knew exactly what was going to happen. They accounted for this. They wanted this to happen. they're taking out their competitors through Iran whilst expanding their power. They are going to be the winners in the end. Okay? People need to understand that. I've heard a lot of people say the US miscalculated, the US miscalculated. No. US followed Israel. Israel knew exactly how Iran would react. If they could blow up pages, Jackson, if they could blow up pages, they had people inside the high command of the Iranian Revolutionary Guards, which enabled them to target Imam Khamenei and then Ali Larijani, may Allah be pleased with him, martyr them, and surely they would have worked this out. So I thought I'd say that. Yeah.
Well, Shahram, I fully, well, first of all, I agree with you on a lot of those points. When you look at these GCC countries, you do see in the videos a lot of the people, a lot of the oppressed people, and many people are oppressed in these countries, and they come from all, stripes, all sects of Islam, and they are cheering. There's no doubt about it. They are cheering for what is going on, and they do not like the fact that there are U.S. bases in their country. They do not like the fact that their government is, held in a stranglehold by the United States and by Israel. And, I say all the power to them. I really do. Some of you may know that in the first opening, I think it was like day 5 of this war that's ongoing, the UAE decided to effectively ban me from their country. They drew up criminal charges against me, and I received an email from X, from Twitter, and as well as the Attorney General of the UAE, listing out my criminal violations. They said that I had hurt the national economy and contributed to chaos in the country by uploading videos of the airstrikes on the UAE and talking about the fact that the UAE should not participate in this war against Iran. And it goes without saying, these are like the Labubu Dubai chocolate, porta potty party, kingdoms of the Gulf. They're not real kingdoms, and it's just so pathetic to see how they're all operating. They would literally, they would literally sell out their country for one more Dubai chocolate bar. That's the way I see it. So I am very happy to see that people in the region are standing in defiance as much as they can. I guess they'll be arrested. In Bahrain, they said they'll give them a death penalty if they record videos of the airstrikes. In Israel, they'll arrest you for 5 years if you record videos of the strikes. And I'm sure it's the same in some of these other countries as well. But let's move on to the next caller. We've got John calling in from Florida. John, how you doing tonight? Thank you so much for calling in.
Thank you. Nice for you to take my call, Jackson. Enjoying the show thoroughly. I have a couple of questions, but I want to make... Go ahead. Yes. Oh, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I have a couple of questions for later on, but I want to make some comments. This is not a religious war. I'm a Christian from Syria, from the Middle East, and right now I am back in Iran just because, this issue is way, way deeper, religion. It's what Israel wants. Israel wants to be the bully of the Middle East. Okay, they destroyed my country, which is Syria. They destroyed Libya. I mean, wherever they go, they destroy. They want full control of the Middle East. Okay, and this thing about the United States, I live in the United States, okay, I love this country, but we talk about democracy. We always say we got to bring democracy. Show me where America went into and brought democracy. It's always been chaos, killings, wars, killing women and children. Example, Gaza, Syria, Lebanon, wherever they go, Libya, Okay? This is not, again, not a country that the Arabs can trust anymore. Okay? We're here to protect you. You know, Trump goes there and he gets millions and billions of dollars and uses the word, uses the phrase, we're going to protect you from Iran. What happened when Iran fired back? All the equipment went to Israel. Because why? We're not America. We are Israel. Okay? We are Israel. That's the comments I like to make. My question to you is, Trump has been saying 7, 8, 9 times already that we won the war. Okay? If we won the war, why are we still bombing? Okay? That would be my first question. My second question is, the United States, what do you think they should be doing to get out and try to save face? Because right now we know that's all they're trying to do. And thank you for listening to me.
Well, John, thank you for calling in. I'll start with your last point. What can the U.S. do to get out? How can they save face? Well, there really is nothing that can be done at this point in terms of saving face. I mean, maybe Trump can rely on this notion that there's so many people in America who are uninformed and don't have the time to inform themselves because they're focusing on how they can make enough money at their 3 or 4 jobs to pay for the gas that they need to put in their car to keep going to work. And he could just end this all and say, I won and we took out Khamenei and that's that. He could do that. We all know that he's not going to do that. But we also know that the Iranians, frankly, aren't going to want to put an end to this until U.S. forces are out of the region. Why would Iran agree to a ceasefire from their perspective if they know that U.S. forces are going to come right back in to Kuwait, to Bahrain, maybe even to their bases in Syria? They're going to rebuild their bases in Iraq. They're going to rebuild their bases in the UAE and Saudi Arabia and Jordan. Why would the Iranians say, okay, we're done? They haven't responded to any of Steve Witkoff's pleas. He's been sending text messages that have gone unanswered. He's like a desperate ex-girlfriend or something, trying to get the Iranians back to the negotiating table, but they refuse. The U.S. tried to go through Italy and reach the Iranians in the first 24 hours of the conflict. That failed as well. The reason why is because they understand that unless the United States learns a lesson, and even more so unless they understand that they are not welcome in the region, the cycle is only going to continue. So I think it's very interesting we're seeing these comments from the Iranians say that, the pre-war status of the Strait of Hormuz will never return. They're saying things, Mojtaba Khamenei, the supreme leader, is saying things like the United States needs to leave the region once and for all. It's unclear what the region entails. Does that entail Jordan as well? Does that entail Turkey? I don't know. We'll have to wait and see. But they're saying things like this, and they also have made it very clear that they must be reciprocated for the damages that these GCC countries have helped create in their country by allowing these attacks to take place. And if they are not reciprocated, if the GCC countries won't do that, maybe because they can't do it, because they're also going to be on the tab for rebuilding these U.S. bases when the U.S. says they want to come back in, then Iran will, in fact, impose a equal amount of financial damage to assets of the West in the Gulf states. But that's my thoughts. There's no way out unless the U.S. withdraws from the region. As for the possibility of this ending anytime soon, I don't see it. I think Trump is a egomaniac. I don't think it's going to be happening. But I guess we'll wait and see. I think it's going to get, my thoughts are it's going to get a lot worse before it gets better. Anyways, let's go to some comments. We've got so many comments that are coming in tonight. We got thousands of them. I want to say thank you to all of you. We can't read them all. You can scan the QR code on the bottom right of the screen right now and leave a comment on the YouTube stream. We'll read some of them out here on the Mother of All Talk Show. So let's go through a few of these. We've got a super chat in here, it looks like. I think that's what it is, from Gray Scout Epsilon, saying the value in simply having Tucker run for president and during his campaign awakening America in the process with constant truth bombs. Well, or truth bombs, yeah. No, I think he'd win. I'll be honest with you. I don't think it would be some sort of a, you know, some people are saying, oh, Tucker should run as an independent. Okay, he runs as an independent, he runs as a Republican, he runs as a who knows what, right? If he's not with the American Communist Party, if he's not with the Workers' Party of Great Britain, you're going to be compromised in one way or another, right? Look at what happened to Robert F. Kennedy Jr. He ran as an independent, and then he ran as a Democrat, then an independent, and now he's in Trump's cabinet, and he's a full-on Zionist championing all these wars. And he's not speaking out against anything that's happening. I know he leads like the Health and Human Services Department or whatever he leads, but it's like even that, nothing has happened. Nothing dramatically has changed in the United States regarding the health and well-being of our people. And he just goes along to get along because he's in the White House. I don't think Tucker's someone who can be compromised. So I think that regardless of where he runs, he's going to give it his best shot. And he won't go down without a big fight. And I think that he, of course, has a best shot running in the party that he's been a member of his entire life. But we'll see what happens. I personally am praying. I'm personally praying that Tucker Carlson runs. I don't think any one person can take on the whole system. But yes, I do agree. This would be a massive dent in the machine. Greg Lotes, thank you for the comment. You said, most smart people like Tucker stay far away from Washington. It's far too corrupt to be salvaged by anyone. That's true. That's why he's not in Washington. He lives in Maine, in the force of Maine. YCHTT, thank you for the comment. Just remember, Tucker, CIA Carlson father was the head of the CIA media VOA, and Tucker literally helped cover up of 9/11. Well, YC, that's a very unforgiving comment of Tucker's career. I hope that no one ever goes with a fine-tooth comb through your political positions you've had your entire life. But we'll say that of course, yes, his father was in the CIA. That is true, and should not be ignored. In fact, there's a lot of people who have their dads who are spooks that I find kind of interesting. But I think that Tucker. The only way you can judge someone, myself included, George included, is by the record that they lead. You can look at my record, my entire life. You can look at George's record, and he's got a record that beats all of us. George Galloway has a record that beats each and every one of us. And that's the only way you can judge someone, because people can change on the drop of a dime, okay? So there's no real way of saying that I fully trust this person or I fully trust that person, and I will till the end of time, because look at how many people trusted President Donald Trump, voted for him 3 times, spent God knows how much money donating to his campaigns, and now they can't afford the gas at the pump when they need to go to work because he decided to wage a war for Miriam Adelson and Benjamin Netanyahu, which is undoubtedly going to result in the deaths of countless U.S. troops if they do continue on this path of, I guess, sending troops to Carg Island. It's not going to go well. We got Linda Ortiz, thank you for the comment. Tucker Carlson would be unalived if elected president. I don't even want to put that stuff out in the air. May God protect Tucker Carlson. Maxine Adderley, thank you for the comment. Tucker and Candace for president and vice president. Well, that's an idea. Okay. We've got one last call of the night, folks. We've got, let's see here. Do we still have that call? Are they still on the line? Let's see. Let's see here. We've got Erebus from New York on the line, I believe. Erebus, how are you doing?
Can you hear me, young man?
Yes, how are you doing? Thank you so much for calling in.
Fantastic. Salubrious salutations and felicitations. More power to you, as Mr. G would say. Jackson can't wrinkle the hinkle, going from strength to strength. More power to Clan Galloway, the wonderful Moats staff, the crown jewel thereof, Chay the Magnificent, first of her name. I wanted to share a perspective about the Houthis, but before I did that, I wanted to say that the interview with retired Lieutenant Colonel Aguilar was spot on, and most of what he said I'm familiar with. As you may recall, the first People's Party Rage Against the War Machine, the People's Party doesn't even exist anymore. To sort of add on to your point a bit, they folded their tent behind the shadow of RFK, and the website is gone, which is a shame. But there's the ACP, not a communist myself, but I do love the work and the points of the American Communist Party. So if there's any hope for this place that they call America, I'd put my energy behind the ACP if they would accept it. Aside from that, I met Tulsi on that day for the first time, and the very first impression I got from her is a woman with sharp teeth who was very ambitious and cold-blooded. And, what people don't remember about her is that before they changed her Wikipedia profile, you have to go onto the links and see it. It stated clearly before she was elevated into DNI that she's a specialist in psyops. There's a unit in the military that specializes in psychological operations, and she's an expert. I think she's like a lieutenant or something in that, has her own subunit. So she knows how to gaslight, she knows how to manipulate, she knows how to basically be a psychopath, right? Break up in these different personalities, all self-contained, all contradictory. These people are trained in that. So when I met her, I asked her if she was going to join the then erstwhile People's Party, and then she smiled, and then she looked like Jaws, and I saw the cold flint in her eyes, and I said, she's serious. She'll probably eat her young just to get elevated. So once you meet somebody and you get that energy from them, doesn't matter what they say. But that was just my experience. I'm waiting to see the Houthis, Ansar Allah al-Houthi. I'm waiting for them to get involved because they have a personal blood debt to pay against Saudi Arabia. Because for 5 years or more under Obama, on the auspices of Barack the bloodthirsty, Barack the bullshit Obama, they allowed this whole, the genocide in Yemen to take place. And, if it wasn't for the the toughness and the resilience and the faith, I'm not religious, but their faith definitely plays a major part, as you would know, because you had your boots on the ground there, even for a little bit. I want to see them get involved and, basically carve out that part of Saudi Arabia and make it one Yemen, because I don't think Saudi and a lot of these GCC countries are long for this world. Thanks for the time.
Well, thank you for the kind words, and I share your thoughts on Tulsi Gabbard. It's just pathetic. The words I would like to say about Tulsi Gabbard, I'll save for my Twitter, because I don't think that they're safe for the YouTube algorithm, to be honest. But what I'll say as a final note here is that, yes, that is where everyone should be watching, Yemen, because Saudi Arabia is still able to export their goods through the Bab el-Mandeb Strait in the Red Sea for now. They're the only GCC country who still has the ability to transfer goods and exports by sea, and they're doing it through there. But they do have a very strong proxy force that is now unimpeded by the UAE. The UAE has left, their proxy forces have left Yemen. The Saudis have a very strong proxy force in Yemen, and I guarantee you that it will be a very, very large blow that will play out against the Saudis and the Yemenis, and the Yemenis are preparing. I know that for a fact. It goes without saying. Mohammed al-Baqaidi, the spokesperson and a senior official for Yemen's Ansar Allah, said as much and said that they will join this conflict, and soon they will be announcing a 0 hour. So that time is coming, but for now, preparations are underway, I'm sure, in Sana'a and in Sada, and all across the west and the north of Yemen. On that note, folks, I want to say thank you so much for tuning in. That's going to be all for tonight. I had an incredible time joining the mother of all talk shows. It's my third time joining. I would have probably joined more times, but YouTube had banned me for a while, and I wasn't able to. But thank you so much for being back here, and we'll see you all back here very soon on the Mother of All Talk Show, Sunday with George Galloway.